For today's main program, I'm pleased to bring Seattle 4 member Lori Hennessy to the podium to introduce our guest speaker today. Lori?
Thank you. Hi, Rotarians. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, one of my very favorite people. In my day life, I lead the League of Education Voters, and Dr. Ben Danielson gave our keynote at our annual event this last year on racial equity in education. So I'm very, very honored to introduce you to him today. Ben's a clinical professor of pediatrics at the University of Washington. He's formerly the senior medical director for the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic, part of Children's Hospital, where he worked for more than 20 years as an advocate for patients and a very, very important backbone of the community. Dr. Ben has an intriguing and inspiring life story going from foster care to his life today, in which he participates on numerous boards and coalitions, speaks frequently around us in the community about racial justice, and he changes the community around us. A few of my favorite talks, if you haven't heard them, were his UW 2019 commencement address and this year's Martin Luther King address for King County. Dr. Benz found opportunities within and outside of systems to advocate in partnership with groups and individuals who are dedicated and passionate about creating a better world. He's inspired every day by the children, families, communities, and organizations with whom he interacts. And I promise you that he will make you think today. And past President Mark Wright is evening news anchor at King TV in Seattle. Mark's a 4-time Emmy winner and is being inducted into the Murrow College Hall of Achievement at his alma mater, Washington State University, at the end of this month. P.S. to Mark, he grew up in Ferndale. I grew up in Everson, so go Whatcom County. So I am delighted to introduce to you Dr. Ben and Mark Wright. Take it away.
All right, Lori, thank you so much, and what a great introduction. I know if you're from Everson, you can't be half bad. We small town people have to stick together. Well, fellow Rotarians and guests, I'm really excited that you're here today to hear from a man that I really consider an icon and a treasure in our community, Dr. Ben Danielson. Today is going to be a chance for all of us to do some self-reflection. Some things that we're going to talk about today will be really uncomfortable. And that's the point, because if we're going to be honest about where we are as a society right now, we have to admit that we have work to do when it comes to racism and equity in our society. We have not arrived. We will never arrive. This is a process that we have to continue to work on. So I'm glad that you're all here today. And I think today's conversation will be enlightening. It'll be challenging, and it'll be well worth your time today. We will have adequate time for questions and answers. So when we get to the end of my conversation with Ben, just put your question in the chat. I'll scroll through that and I'll pose those questions to Ben. So first of all, Dr. Ben, it's so great to have you here. I want to start with your childhood, because I think as white people, we do not have the same experience as people of color in this country in terms of how we're raised and the messages that we get and the teaching we get from elders in the community. So I want you to paint that picture, Dr. Ben, of your time in Washington, D.C., and Big Mama Pearl was one of your mentors in the neighborhood. Take us back to that time and talk about some of those early lessons.
I first want to say how honored I am to be part of this gathering today. I'm so happy to be here. I've already learned so much about St. Patrick's Day and many other things. So thank you for the warm welcome. My wife heard some of the music in the background, and she was jamming, dancing around the floor to it as well. Going back to those days in DC when I was really searching for a sense of connectedness to the Black community that's there, and was doing some combination of looking for ways to get in trouble and looking for guidance to get out of it, and often in rapid succession. I'll bet a lot of you have stories like that from your own upbringings, but it was really an interesting challenge to understand what it means in this country to be Black, to be a Black child, to see what that's like. Particularly remember kind of going from almost a moment, almost a switch, when I could see the way people saw me changed, where I went from kind of being this really cute, nappy-haired, skinny kid, and getting these comments about, wow, you know, what a cute little kid, to suddenly being seen as potentially a threat, seen as somebody that could be threatening to the people around them. And it was confusing, and also, disheartening, challenging. And it was lucky for me, I had guides like Big Mama Pearl to help me through those days, to give me very cryptic answers to my very weird questions, and to try to ground me in the Black experience in America.
So Ben, let's talk about some of those lessons. There's a lesson, for lack of a better term, that's called the twice as good talk. Tell us what that is and how that lesson played out in your life.
Big Mama Pearl taught me the twice as good talk. And it was a long time before I realized that so many other young Black and brown children got that same talk. I thought it was a unique conversation, but now it makes sense. She was trying to prepare me for the world where, in order to succeed, you had to outperform in a way that was demonstrably different than others. You had to be twice as good. You had to be twice as good to get as far as other folks when it came to academic performance, when it came to athletic performance, when it came to really working across different lines of social contacts and contexts. It also meant you had to probably lower the intensity of your emotions by half, that you had to be really careful about the way you talked, that you had to make sure that you weren't too emotional or too abrasive in the way you interacted with other people. It was really about being accepted and acceptable, and maybe making sure people felt comfortable around you.
Ben, I'm guessing that some kids are motivated by that talk, and I'm guessing that some kids may think, well, what's the use? I'm guessing some kids check out after that talk.
Yeah, it can push you in one or the other direction, can't it? Or maybe back and forth. I really hope today's youth are not hearing that talk in that way, because that's an age and an era of our society that just we need to be pushing into our background. I really want to see, I don't know, the students that I interact with, the young people I see, I want them to be able to show up with their full, audacious, loud, proud, wild selves. I want us all to see, especially kids of color, as these fountains of potential and beauty and power and expression. So I hope we're pushing that behind us.
I want to tell a really brief story related to this. I have a friend who works in TV news. He's Black. He works as a producer. So a producer in TV news is the person who oversees and executes the newscast. It's a super high pressure job. And one day I said to him, I said, Aaron, you never lose your cool. And I really admired that quality, because I have lost my cool before, and it's embarrassing. And you have to say you're sorry after that. What he told me, and this was years ago, was really a wake-up call for me. He said, Mark, the way I act is a conscious decision. He said, if you yell at someone, you're being assertive. He said, if I yell at someone, I'm a threat, and I might get taken up to HR. And I'm also the stereotypical angry Black man. Today, Aaron works at another TV station, and he actually has his PhD. And you talk about, twice as good, and that story of not being too loud and not being too assertive. And that story, when Aaron told that story to me, broke my heart, because it made me think, as white people, we never, ever have to have that thought. Am I being too loud? Am I being inappropriate? How are people going to perceive me? Tell me how that dynamic played itself out in your life, Ben, because you've risen through the ranks of various leadership positions, and I'm guessing that dynamic has faced you front and center time and time again.
Such a complicated question. It sounds so simple. First, though, I would say I completely imagine that women rising up in businesses across our country have had to do that, their version of that, not exactly the same, but probably even harder on so many levels. And so try to imagine being a Black woman trying to work through and rise up in systems. We all face different challenges, and the way they play out for us is different in different spaces. It creates a bit of everything from the imposter syndrome, of course, which I don't know if anybody else has ever had that feeling of just somebody's going to tug me on the shoulder and say at some point, hey, it was supposed to be Danielson who was going through all of this and going through these achievements, not you. Or that there would just be one thing that it would take for me to be knocked out of wherever I was hoping my journey would take me. I think that it also is a weird thing in that people, they encourage it, just like you said with your friend. I was talking to another media person, and she was sharing how people described her as so measured, so composed and measured. And on the one hand, that has helped her to advance in her career. And on the other hand, it is a sacrifice. It is a shadowing. It is a veiling of who you really are. And what other compromises are you making in your life, in your identity, in order to try to succeed?
I love the story of your mother deciding to move the family to Montana without having a job lined up because she wanted to work in forestry. I was raised working on my uncle's organic vegetable farm in Ferndale, which the neighbors called the hippie farm. So I could totally relate to this story.
Yeah.
But it made me think that, wow, you plop young Ben Danielson in the middle of Montana several decades ago, and that must have been a challenging environment. How did that shape who you were as a person and how you navigated in the world?
There was a time when I was angry about that. I have to be honest about that, and that played out in different ways. I have to say that I created friendships with some of the most pure-hearted, good, solid people I've ever met in Montana, and there were also these innocent forms of unrealized bias and things that showed up that were, I guess, teachable moments is what we would call them today. There were times when the town was kind of split in half, the small town, between, I think, people that wanted to run me out and people that, were supportive. All of that in the background of, I hope not playing into these stereotypes, but, captain of the basketball team and valedictorian for the high school and things. So really complex, double, triple, quadruple life, right? Lauded on one side and vilified on the other. Those things are not so easy for adolescent minds to sort of fully wrap their heads around.
When did you realize, Ben, that you were a good student and that you wanted to go on to become a medical doctor?
I don't know if good student came up, but my mom always challenges me. Her form of respect is an argument, which is not the Northwest way, I know, and I'm still kind of learning that. But if she respects you enough to challenge your thinking, then she thinks very highly of you. And so I don't know if it was a good student, but a good thought partner was something that I think she instilled in all of us. And it pushed us to be critical thinkers and to be hopefully sometimes challenging the way people thought about things, but also really trying to push things into a different space. The smartest thing I do maybe is work with people who are all smarter than me, marry somebody who's smarter than me, get to spend time with other people who are smarter than me. And that's maybe been my pathway to growth and knowledge across my path. My sisters are incredible people who also push and challenge. And I think it's one of the greatest gifts in our lives, in humanity, to know that there are people around us who always want us to be just a little bit better.
You, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did your residency at the UW, right?
Yes.
And you were drawn immediately at the early part of your career to Seattle Children's because of its history, started by women, deep values to care for all kids regardless of race, religion, creed, or ability to pay. It seems like in the early days that was the perfect fit. Take me back to that time in your career, Ben, and what that felt like and what you hope to be able to do at the start of your career.
I've committed myself to be as vulnerable as possible these days. So I'm going to be vulnerable for a moment and say, being raised with a single mom and two sisters, I sought a lot of mentorship from lots of different places, but especially from different kinds of father figures and men. And there were a lot of mentors at Seattle Children's, actually both men and women, who were willing to, lend an ear, be extra supportive, be encouraging. And that sense of that kind of a community within a hospital was something very powerful to me. There are people who are still there today who were there on my very worst days, most embarrassing days, and maybe those few days when I was doing something that was shining. And those relationships are the kinds of things that are gold, that are most precious. The chance to build those relationships over decades has been one of the most important things, and that's what's kept me so connected to Seattle Children's. The people, more than the other components of the hospital, and the chance to, show up in a young person's life in so many different ways, maybe on the family's worst day, at the worst realization of something, but maybe also on some of their best days, when you get to hear something about a child discovering who they are and what they want to be and what they want to do. The chance to do that in the different aspects of working both inside a hospital and in a community clinic. There's no way I should ever have gotten paid for any of the days I've worked so far as a pediatrician.
So you got your dream job in 1999 as the medical director of the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic. I think we all recognize that there are inequities to the medical system for people of color in this country. But as you started to work on the inside of this system, what stood out to you as some of the causes of inequity when it comes to medical care for people of color?
These combinations of things where there are such deeply seated and unrecognized biases that show up in ways that have a direct impact on families. When people are different from what we expect, it does elicit fear sometimes when people's norms and practices and behaviors and what makes them who they are from some cultural background is different from yours. It creates sometimes a misunderstanding or a disunderstanding, if that's a word. And then on top of that is this long legacy of really specific racism and harm to enslaved Black people, to people of color in other aspects. There's this long history of bias towards people who are not part of maybe the comfort zone. So that combination of strangeness, unfamiliarity, and that very particular part of racism and other forms of bias, they seep into our systems. We try to say that we work and act without bias. I would love to say that the emergency room that I worked in my first years out of residency was free of bias, but I know that it is part of this national statistic that says that if you are a Black child and you have appendicitis, something really, really painful in your body, you are less likely to get pain medication than if you are a white child with appendicitis coming into an ER. There's no place that is really fully cushioned from that. Our biases and our racism have worked their ways into our systems. We can't deny it. The evidence is just way too overwhelming. And the experiences are way too heartbreaking to see among the families that you care about and try to serve. And in some small ways, you know, each one of us plays a complicit role. I play a complicit role as part of my own reckoning in this time for me about where the times I should have stood up stronger, maybe when I should have been more of the angry Black man. When are the times when I should have figured some other way to advance the interests of this community or these families? What's the thing you could have done to try harder?
I'm guessing more than a few people, Ben, have asked you, you know, what happened? You left Seattle Children's without the prospect of another job. You left with no golden parachute. You left with no severance package. You didn't want to be bound by any gag orders. You know, I know we don't have time to get into all of it, but take me through like the key moments that you thought, I just can't keep staying here.
There were some wounds that were older, some racially charged hate language that went back a ways, that later the same person was sort of being lauded for in their work with diversity. And that was, I can't describe it to you in any other way unless you're a Black person. That is an incredibly harmful, hurtful kind of thing to do. There were ways in which I was watching what I felt for our Black community was placing more families at risk during this COVID time. There are pieces of seeing people of good spirit and good integrity, but who were speaking out against things, who were being sort of pushed to the side or kind of silenced. There is just the undeniable data of the turnover rate for people of color at Seattle Children's is higher than it is for white or non-BIPOC communities. There are these things that all kind of add up, and then as we started to talk as a nation about a racial reckoning around the time that George Floyd had his life extinguished over almost 9 minutes, organizations started to put out statements about that. And I found the statement that my organization put out to be, to feel so insincere, to be so short of the mark. And maybe this is twice as good, Big Mama Pearl in me. I want to apologize if that's not the intention of the hospital, but the impact was a statement that didn't feel like it held anything to it. And false statements or insincere statements can feel even worse than no statement at all during important times when we need to hear. I needed to hear something different. I needed to hear that I was working for an organization that understood what role they played in this, understood that they were looking at themselves in a different way moving forward, understood something different. And I wasn't seeing that. Those were all pieces of something bigger than straws on my camel's back, but something definitely additive, and things that just really forced me to do my own reckoning again.
I want to make sure that I understand it, Ben. You're saying that there was a senior level person at Seattle Children's who used the N-word in reference to you, and that person was not reprimanded, but rather has succeeded. Is that right?
Yeah, and used the J word in reference to Asian Americans, and we're seeing what's happening these days in the Asian Americans communities. Used pretty misogynistic language as well, and it wasn't even really challenged. It was just considered the result of the assessment of it was that it was just basic swearing and not anything more than that. And there's probably a fair debate people could have about where swearing ends and where hate speech begins. For me, it was really hateful, and it was coming from a top leader, and that top leader stayed in position and reaped a great benefit from a career at Seattle Children's.
You also say, Ben, that you were frustrated by a lack of translation services for clients at Odessa Brown, and how often that security was called on people of color as compared with white people. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the security issue at the hospital, not at the clinic, but at the hospital. They called it Code Purple when a parent was acting in a way that made a hospital staff member want to call security. And there were studies of this, so go back 10, 12 years, that showed that Seattle Children's called security on Black families disproportionately and hugely disproportionately more often than they did on white families. And this information was known. It was information that the hospital itself had gathered, and they'd really done nothing to address that. And not even really started to talk about that until just a few months ago.
I want to make sure we have enough time for some Q&A with our members, Ben. But right after you left Seattle Children's, a group of high-profile donors called for a meeting with management. Did anything happen after that? Did any changes made?
Yeah, I think the hospital has struggled through trying to respond to this time. And some of the time I feel like it's just truly just a struggle, like they can't figure out how to respond. Some of the time I think there's a bit of hubris or just wanting to not have to change too much. But there has been response thanks to a lifting up of voices that I've never experienced in any other way in my life. I've just been amazed by the number of people who were willing to say something and to speak out. And many of those people were very influential parts of the hospital and really called for a different kind of response. And so that leader ended up leaving the hospital, and the hospital had been working towards some equity and anti-racist related work. And I think it accelerated big components of that work. And then the third piece is a assessment by an outside organization, Covington Law Group, which includes a very famous Black lawyer.
I heard you say, Ben, in an op-ed that you wrote recently, that these institutions are us. So when we talk about changing institutions, you know, this group that you're talking to right now is connected to hundreds, literally hundreds of institutions. Take that statement, these institutions are us, and open our eyes to what we need to do in terms of, you know, start how we navigate in these institutions. How do we reform healthcare in America? What are some good first steps?
Oh, that's a big other layer of question. I want to say that I continue to do my own reckoning, and I do that as an invitation for others to do their personal reckoning as well, to think very deeply about the spaces and places where opportunities to advance equity and racial justice and diversity and inclusion were missed or were only partially implemented. I want to invite people to challenge themselves to ask the question, are we as a group or an organization sharing power the way we should be sharing power? That's a hard one, and it goes against sometimes the structures of our organizations, but I have this personal belief that the power is not a limited resource. It's only limited when you kind of hold on to it selfishly. I feel power is limitless, and it grows when you share it. I feel that the folks who've been the most disempowered over time deserve an intentional, specific effort to share power with. And that can show up in so many different ways in your lives, in the spaces that you know, and in the ways that you see. I know that we all have have taken up the kinds of biases and things that our country has so deeply entwined in its infrastructure. And I also know that we are a place that still seeks to be a more perfect union. And so I guess I want to invite people to get on with it, to get into that space of what does it mean to be more perfect? Not perfect. Mark, you said it so well, that to get on a journey, not a destination, to find ways to have conversations that make you feel uncomfortable and like sit there in discomfort maybe for a while and really explore and understand where that is going, where it's coming from. Find a different way of listening to people who might speak about things in ways that aren't familiar to you, that might not fit the way you are thinking of the world or talking about it. I invite a personal reflection, and that could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And then I invite a commitment to an action that changes the spaces around you. Because just in the same way that these organizations and institutions are us, we are also the change for those organizations. I believe Barack Obama a little more than I believe Martin Luther King Jr. in that statement about the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice. I think it only bends towards justice if we put our muscles to it.
Over the past year, my company, King 5, started a real concerted effort to peel back what we need to start addressing as an organization when it comes to race. And we brought in a race expert. And the thing that's been most refreshing and enlightening is that in our workplace now, all of us feel so free to have those discussions. There's no fear that, like the other night, I was talking with my co-anchor, Joyce, just between shows. Joyce, as you know, a woman of color, African-American, and we have these discussions all the time. I was like, Joyce, if I was a person of color, I would, here's what I would think. And then she said something to me, and we're able to have these conversations now in ways that we weren't before. So if there's just a single first step, it's getting to that place where we're okay that we're going to make mistakes when we talk about this, but holding back because we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing just perpetuates the problem, right?
So well said. Yeah, I wouldn't add anything to that. That was perfectly said.
Well, Ben, I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. I don't see a lot of questions in the Q&A yet, so if you guys have questions, jump into the chat. Briefly, Ben, tell us what you are doing with UW Medicine now and what you hope to accomplish there.
Well, I'm really trying to be thoughtful about the foundational elements that give our young people, especially our Black and Brown young people, opportunities to have successful, amazing lives, and focusing in on a few points in our society that we need to address. I'm in this mode of, and COVID brought it to me, really. It is so important to do the right thing. And we mostly know what the right thing to do is. If we're honest with ourselves, we kind of lack sometimes the will to get over the systems that get in the way of doing the right thing. And one corollary to that is also stopping doing things that are harmful. Do the right thing, stop doing the wrong thing. One thing that is really wrong in our society, in this county, in this state, in this nation, is our approach to youth incarceration. And there are many good people in this county and across the state working on changing that, and I want to be part of that journey as well. That's the briefest version I think I could share on that.
All right, Ben, thank you. We have a question from our president-elect, Jimmy Collins. Ben, you've been successful navigating a variety of life and professional experiences where biases were present. What coaching would you offer us to watch our environments when it comes to our environments for people of color who are trying, and how do we show them that we are sincerely wanting to practice equal opportunity?
I think that there are good ways to notice how to encourage people to show up with their fullest selves. And maybe you might see and notice when someone is working in a way that is kind of trying to overperform and be twice as good. I think we can see that and recognize that and start to expunge that. I think that there is a need to get to sort of critical mass in diversity. I can tell you from many experiences, it is not empowering to be the only Black person at a table. It's just, it doesn't work that way where you suddenly are able to really move things when you're the only one or the only one with a particular perspective. So it's something different than having really modest amounts of diversity. I think that there are ways to really encourage these conversations to be part of the workspace. I am a complete believer that if we worked focused on equity, we actually wouldn't need to worry about bottom line. That I think equity drives financial success and performance success and whatever other measure your organization has. I think the values of equity actually are the values that would drive the best success for our organizations. We are a multiplicity of people with different personalities and skills and talents and voices. And I think equity foundations tap into that we are better because we are different kind of perspective. I could probably ramble forever, but I would just name maybe those few points to start with.
Suzanne says, and this kind of speaks to that point, if all organizations in Seattle committed to having a more diverse workforce, she's suggesting, wouldn't that decrease the level of bias because we're working closely with people from all different ethnicities and races, right?
Yeah. I will also say, though, I have seen in different places, diverse people of color who are sometimes in positions where now all of a sudden their job security is interwoven into the status quo. And so, again, it might not always be a numbers game on some level. The culture of the place that they're working has to have something that really is a little bit different. Otherwise, what you're doing is maybe giving somebody great opportunity, but then tying their security to them not making waves. And I think we're in a little bit of that era right now in our efforts around organizational diversity and equity and inclusion. I think there's some warning signs that we need to watch out for like that.
Well, Ben, we are unfortunately out of time. If you do have time, a couple of folks have questions in the chat in terms of books or podcasts and thought leadership you might recommend. But I just want to say thank you for the work that you do in our community and for the example that you are for all of us. Thank you.
I really appreciate the chance to be here and see you. Some people I recognize and so many other people I don't. And that's a really great gift to me to be among a new group of people. And I appreciate that you're really wanting to invite this kind of conversation. These aren't easy. They challenge us and they make you ponder things sometimes. And I'm thankful that this group is really
Well, on behalf of the entire club, Dr. Danielson, we really appreciate your sharing with us today. Mark, nice job as always. Thank you so much.